G'day, what do you think of my accent and my hat from down under? I won't try that. I'm not very good at accents, but there we are. I am just back from a political conference down in Australia, and I wanted to use the lessons learned from that in my Sunday sermon this morning, because Australia is a great nation, it's part of the Commonwealth, and we share so much in common with it. And what I realised is actually sometimes the UK doesn't know best. And what I wanted to share with you this morning in my sermon was some of the lessons that we can learn. Because actually many of the issues that they're experiencing are in a sense exactly the same as what we're experiencing. The day I arrived, there in the newspapers, they were just talking about their budget. And as I say, all of the issues had a very familiar ring to them. Inflation, really concerned. Their inflation rate at just over 7% and rising. Guess what? They too have got a labour shortage. Yes, they've got a real shortage of labour post-COVID, which goes to prove, because the last time I looked, Australia is not in the European Union, that the labour shortage has got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Brexit. Nothing at all. There are labour shortages all over the world, including in Australia. They've also got rising interest rates. They've risen from well under 1% to around 3% as we speak. And yes, they've got all the usual issues with their woke lefties, all the similar things being talked about. Unbelievable. And it just strikes me that with these issues, the debate, therefore, is the same. And politics is also, in Australia, pretty brutal between not only the left and the right, but also within their own parties. Australia actually has a track record of replacing their prime ministers within terms of elections, almost on a whim, as we've just seen here in the UK. And like us, Australia is experiencing slowing growth in their economy. But there's a major, major difference. Just get these numbers, these statistics. In the last 25 years, Australia's economy has grown on average, folks, about 3% every single year. They didn't have a crash in 2008. Our average growth in the last 20 years is just under 2%. So their growth is 50% more every year than our growth in our economy. And that's really, really significant. So they're worrying now that their growth might fall to below 2%. It might even fall to 1.5%. At the moment, frankly, we'd be grateful for 1.5% when we've got the Bank of England forecasting we're going to go into a deep recession, the longest recession any of us can remember. That means negative growth. And yes, sure enough, like here in the UK, climate change is a big part of Australian politics. And indeed, at their recent elections, they've just had, I think, 6 independent MPs, what they call teal MPs, all of whom are women. You have to be a woman in order to be one of these teal MPs. And I was debating one of these independent teal MPs about climate change. And I was shocked. She didn't know what she was talking about. She literally had no idea what she was talking about, even though she'd been elected on a platform that we weren't doing enough to combat climate change. That's the level of sort of slavish adoration of supposedly the settled science without knowing what they were talking about. So yes, climate change is a big part of the political debate down in Australia. But the real reason why their growth is so much higher every year than here in the UK is because, whilst like us, they have lots of commodities, lots of what I call energy treasure under their feet, they use it. Yes, they've got assets under their feet, valuable assets, and they dig it out and they sell it all over the world and they use it. Coal, metals, iron ore, lithium, lead, diamonds, rare earth minerals, zinc. Turns out we've got quite a lot of the same things too, and I'll be talking about that a bit later. But our politicians think it's a really smart idea to leave those valuable assets in the ground and import them from elsewhere. So I discovered while I was down there that whilst we've got a century's worth of coal here in the UK under our feet, we're importing 300,000 tonnes of coal this year from Australia. Just think of the emissions from the fuel in the ship, bringing that coal, lots of ships, literally halfway across the world. That's not to mention the coal we import from America. We were importing coal from Russia. We have been from other nations too. Utter madness. So very smartly, in Australia, they use their commodities, they use their energy treasure under their feet, and guess what? They get higher growth per person, per year. So much so that actually their growth rate is literally 50% higher per person per year. And that's really important. So unsurprisingly, they're generating higher growth, which means higher tax revenues. So they've got a lower total tax take. And guess what they do? They invest it in public services. And when I was speaking at this political conference, and I was describing how our recent Health Secretary, Therese Coffey, under the recent regime, how she proudly announced that it would be a great, determined target to be able to see a GP within 14 days. The whole place fell apart laughing. They said, 14 days, what are you talking about? They said in Australia, there would be literally a riot if you couldn't see a doctor the same day. I'm just going to repeat that because it's so obvious, but we seem to have forgotten it. In Australia, they expect to see a doctor the very same day. And yet we have a target here of 14 days? Really? Oh, but what's their health system? Do they have the NHS, but just run it better? No. It turns out there are other ways to run health systems. Yes, you can have different systems and get better outcomes. They have a social health insurance system. It's very competitive. It's very efficient. And there we are. There's the result. You can see a doctor basically the same day. I think there's a real lesson for us there. There are so many better ways of doing things than what we're seeing here in the UK. And another similarity that's pretty topical at the moment between Australia and the UK, yes, about a decade ago, they had a similar crisis to the one that we're talking about almost every hour of every day at the moment. They had a boats crisis. They had an illegal immigration crisis. And they wondered what to do about it. And there was much soul-searching and hand-wringing from the left who were in power at the time. And then there was a new government elected under Tony Abbott with a determined immigration minister, Scott Morrison, about a decade ago. And they sorted it. So let's just look at what they did to solve this crisis. And let me tell you, that crisis that they had, what they thought was a crisis, was nothing compared to what we're experiencing. The first thing they did was they declared that it was a matter of national security, that it was a genuine threat to their national security. And that's why I'm asking this question to you, for your thoughts, your tweets, your calls. Do you believe the migrant crisis here in the UK has reached such a level that it's actually a threat to our national security? That is my question. That's what they did in Australia. The next thing they did is that they did take the boats, people in the boats, to offshore detention centres on some islands that they had nearby. And they made it crystal clear. They made it essentially a matter of law that no one, and they meant no one, who came via the boats would be resettled in Australia. And when they talked about zero, they meant zero. And so people understood exactly where they stood. And sure, they took a bit of flack from the international community, from the left in Australia, but they did it. They sorted it. They stopped the boats. They dealt with that matter of national security. And so it seems to me that we've got many, many lessons to learn from Australia. We've got lessons about how to use our energy. They have much cheaper energy than we do. They use their treasure under their feet, their commodities. They've got an effective, efficient, competitive health system, which means that they can see a GP in a day. Imagine how much happier everybody in the UK would be if we could see a GP within a day, even 2 days. Maybe I'm being too demanding within a day. Just say 2 days as an absolute certainty. And I was really struck. It was the former Chancellor, a gentleman called Peter Costello, what they call the Treasurer down in Australia. And he said to me, he said, Richard, there would be riots if we couldn't see doctors within a day. This is the sort of ambitious, bold, radical targets that we should have, the lessons we should learn from elsewhere in the world. And yet we're still always being parroted the system that, oh, the NHS is the best in the world. It's the British religion. Well, it may be a religion in this country, but it may not be working. It isn't working. We know it's not working. We need to learn these lessons from elsewhere. And this crucial point, they dealt with the boats because they didn't let them land on their own shores. They took them to other islands. They made it clear no one would be resettled in Australia. And they were able to use extra resources by declaring it a matter of national security. And you look through the papers today, as I come back from Australia, and I just read everything about it, and it's quite clear. We've now got violence emerging within not just one, but various of the detention camps. We've got serious aggravation. We've got staff disappearing into panic rooms, so frightened. We have got a genuine crisis. We've got Albanian criminal gangs taking advantage of the system. Everybody knows it. Most people admit it and are prepared to talk about it. Australia had this crisis. They sorted it. They sorted it. They dealt with it. They were tough. They took the flak, and it was resolved. And in a sense, I want to be hopeful that Suella Braverman and her team have that same courage, that same determination. But I fear we've heard it all before. Here endeth my Sunday sermon.